My name is Daniel Carter, and for most of my life, I believed I had built something solid, something unshakable. My world was one of quiet order, a carefully constructed reality where everything had its place. I was the kind of man who found comfort in routine, in structure. Every morning, before the rest of the city stirred to life, I'd wake up in my meticulously maintained apartment, a high-rise with a sweeping view of the park below. The old brick building, with its ivy-covered facade and vintage charm, had been my sanctuary for years, shielding me from the chaos of the world outside. On the surface, I had it all together. My suits were always crisp, my shoes polished to a mirror shine, and I carried myself with a quiet confidence that made people assume I had never known hardship. But that was far from the truth. Beneath the composed exterior, I was a man who had been burned before, deeply. The scars of past betrayals had left me cautious, wary of promises and wary of love. I never let that show, though. I wore my self-control like armor, keeping the world at a careful distance. At the center of my life was my wife, Olivia. If I was the reserved and methodical type, she was my opposite in every way. Olivia had a way of drawing people in, her energy almost magnetic. She was a force of nature, a woman who thrived in the glittering nightlife of the city. Where I preferred muted colors and quiet spaces, she embraced the bold and the vibrant. Sequined dresses that shimmered under the neon glow, hairstyles that changed as frequently as the city skyline, and a presence that demanded attention wherever she went. By day, she was a whirlwind moving through the city with effortless grace. But by night, she was the undisputed star of a nightclub that pulsed with life, the kind of place where reality blurred into something electric, something surreal. She was impossible to ignore. Her laughter carried through a room like music, and she had this way of making anyone feel like they were the only person that mattered. People whispered that Olivia was destined for something greater, that the stage was just a stepping stone to something bigger. But what most didn't see was the woman behind the dazzling exterior. She was caught between two worlds, the persona she had created and the parts of herself she kept locked away, parts even I wasn't sure I fully understood. Then there was Ryan. Ryan Sullivan was the kind of man who left an impression, whether you wanted him to or not. He was the embodiment of raw, unfiltered energy, a musician whose presence filled every room he entered. He lived in a constant whirlwind of late-night gigs, endless rehearsals, and an insatiable hunger for something just beyond his reach. With his tousled hair, a grin that hinted at trouble, and a voice that could silence a room, he had become something of a legend in the city's music scene. His songs were a strange mix of grit and soul, an edgy fusion of blues and rock that spoke to the parts of people they tried to ignore. He had an undeniable gift, the kind that made even the most jaded crowd stop and listen. But behind the stage presence, behind the easy charm, there was something else. Something haunted. A vulnerability he hid well, but not well enough. And maybe that's why Olivia was drawn to him. Maybe that's why I should have seen what was coming. The city itself was a character in our story, restless, alive, a place where ambition and vice coexisted under the glow of streetlights. And at the heart of it stood the Velvet Pulse, the club where Olivia reigned, where the night came alive in ways that felt intoxicating and dangerous all at once. It was the kind of place where people lost themselves, where secrets unfolded in darkened corners, and where the lines between reality and illusion blurred under flashing lights. For a long time, I thought Olivia and I had something real, something unbreakable. But the club had started to feel different to me, less like a part of her world that I had access to and more like a place where something was happening just out of my reach. Every night, as I drove through the rain-slicked streets, the neon reflections on the pavement reminded me of love's bright but fleeting promises. And lately, I had begun to wonder if those promises had already slipped through my fingers. It wasn't just one thing, not one moment that told me something was wrong. It was the way her laughter felt a little forced when she came home late, the way she looked away just a second too long when I asked about her night. It was a text from an unknown number she dismissed too quickly, a social media post that didn't sit right. Tiny things, fragments that didn't seem like much on their own but, together, painted a picture I wasn't ready to accept. And then the call came. It was a crisp autumn evening, and I was in my study, going through old case files, the steady ticking of the clock and the hum of my desk lamp filling the silence. My phone rang, an unknown number flashing across the screen. Normally, I would have ignored it. But something made me answer. At first, all I heard was breathing. Then, a voice, distorted, hushed. "You need to come to the Velvet Pulse tonight," the caller said, urgency woven into every word. "There's something you need to see. Something about Olivia." A pause. A hesitation, as if they weren't sure whether to say more. "Trust no one," the voice continued. "Check your heart. They're watching." And then the line went dead. I sat there, the phone still in my hand, staring at the screen like it might offer me an explanation. A prank? A mistake? Or was it something else, something real? Doubt crashed over me in waves. Was Olivia hiding something? Had our quiet dinners, our late-night conversations, been nothing more than an illusion? Every instinct in me wanted to dismiss the call as meaningless. But I couldn't. I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever had called me wasn't lying. I needed to know the truth. Within minutes, I was on my feet, pulling on my coat, my keys in hand, my thoughts racing. My whole body felt like it was running on adrenaline, my mind replaying every moment that now felt suspicious in hindsight. There was no turning back now. Whatever was waiting for me at the Velvet Pulse, I had to face it. And so, I stepped into the night, not knowing that by the time the sun rose again, my entire life would be unrecognizable. The drive to the Velvet Pulse felt longer than usual, even though I knew the route by heart. The city looked different under the glow of neon signs and streetlights, the familiar streets warped by the weight of my thoughts. Every stoplight felt like a test of patience, every honk in the distance like an omen I didn't want to acknowledge. The rain had left the road slick, the reflections of passing headlights stretching across the pavement like ghosts of things I couldn't name. By the time I pulled up near the club, my pulse was pounding in my ears. The Velvet Pulse was everything the night promised: loud, alive, and intoxicating. The building itself was a converted warehouse, its industrial bones masked by flashing lights, booming bass, and the kind of energy that swallowed people whole. Through the large glass doors, I could see silhouettes moving in rhythm with the music, their bodies shifting and swaying like they were part of something bigger, something untouchable. I hesitated at the entrance. The anonymous caller's words replayed in my mind: "Trust no one. Check your heart. They're watching." Who they were, I had no idea. But the paranoia clung to me, tightening around my ribs. I had never been a man to jump to conclusions, never the kind to act on impulse without proof. But standing there, in the glow of pulsing LED lights and the muffled thump of the club speakers, I knew there was no turning back. I stepped inside. The moment I crossed the threshold, the energy hit me like a tidal wave. The scent of perfume and liquor mixed with the sharp tang of sweat and desperation. Bodies pressed together on the dance floor, the crowd moving as one under flickering strobe lights. The music wasn't just sound, it was a force, a living, breathing thing that pulsed through the walls and floors. I scanned the room, my eyes darting through the crowd, searching for her. I spotted familiar faces, bartenders I'd seen in passing, patrons who practically lived here. But it was the people I didn't recognize that made my skin prickle. There were hushed conversations happening in darkened booths, eyes that flickered toward me before quickly looking away. I moved through the club with purpose, careful not to draw too much attention to myself, but I could feel it anyway. That quiet, suffocating sense of being watched. I found a spot near the back, where the shadows stretched long and the noise didn't feel so overwhelming. From there, I could observe without being seen. And then, as if summoned by my thoughts, the stage lights flared to life. A hush fell over the club, the music shifting, slowing, creating space for something, or someone, to take center stage. And then she appeared. Olivia. Even now, after all these years, she could still take my breath away. She moved like she owned the night, her sequined dress shimmering under the lights, catching every flicker of color and spinning it into something otherworldly. Her presence commanded attention, and she knew it. She thrived on it. The crowd was hers, hanging on her every move, every glance. But I wasn't watching her the way they were. I was watching him. Ryan. He stepped into the light like he belonged there, like the stage had been built for him. The moment he appeared beside Olivia, something inside me twisted. Their chemistry was undeniable, impossible to ignore. It started subtly, a shared look, the way he reached for her hand, the way she let him. But then it grew, the space between them shrinking with each movement, each perfectly timed step of their routine. At first, I told myself it was just an act. A performance. But then I saw it. The way his fingers lingered on her waist longer than they should have. The way she looked at him, not like a fellow performer, but like a woman completely lost in something bigger than herself. The way their bodies moved together, fluid, synchronized, too in tune with each other for it to be just a rehearsed show. The crowd was mesmerized. I was horrified. The performance blurred the lines between entertainment and something painfully real. It was seductive, raw, the kind of thing that had the audience leaning forward, breathless. But for me, it was something else entirely. It was confirmation. The unspoken truth that had been creeping into my mind, the one I had been so desperate to ignore. This wasn't just a performance. This was a confession. Every move, every touch, every whispered word exchanged between them under the guise of the show felt like a knife slipping between my ribs. And the worst part? The audience was cheering. They were watching the unraveling of my marriage, and they had no idea. I clenched my fists so tightly that my nails dug into my palms. The anonymous caller had been right. I wasn't paranoid. I wasn't losing my mind. She had been hiding something from me. And now, she wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. The music built toward its climax, the tension on stage mirroring the tension inside me. And then, the final moment, the moment that shattered whatever fragile hope I had been holding on to. Ryan pulled her in, his lips dangerously close to her ear, his hands firm on her waist. And Olivia, she leaned into him. She didn't pull away. She didn't hesitate. She let it happen. My vision blurred, rage and heartbreak clashing inside me, fighting for dominance. The room around me faded, the cheers of the crowd becoming a distant hum. I had seen enough. I turned sharply and made my way toward the exit, my mind racing faster than my feet could carry me. The truth had been laid bare. But now, I had a choice to make. I pushed my way through the throngs of people, my pulse hammering against my ribs like a war drum. The music, the lights, the cheers, it all felt distant, like I was underwater, drowning in the weight of what I'd just seen. My breath was shallow, my hands trembling with the sheer force of my emotions. Rage, betrayal, heartbreak, they swirled inside me, each fighting for control. I needed air. I needed to get out. The second I stepped outside, the cool night air hit me like a slap, sharp and bracing against my overheated skin. The city still pulsed with life, cars honking in the distance, laughter spilling from nearby bars, neon lights flickering in rhythm with the chaos inside me. I leaned against the cold brick of the club's exterior, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My hands curled into fists. My mind replayed the performance in relentless detail, the way Olivia had looked at him, the way their bodies had moved together in perfect synchronicity, the way she hadn't pulled away. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't my imagination. She was his as much as she was mine. Maybe more. A bitter laugh escaped me, unbidden. Had I really been this blind? Had I ignored the signs for so long that now, when the truth was glaringly obvious, it felt like a physical blow? I squeezed my eyes shut, willing the memories away, but they wouldn't leave. The unanswered texts, the late nights at the club, the way she'd started pulling away from me little by little. It had all been there, hiding in plain sight. I just hadn't wanted to see it. I pulled out my phone, staring at the black screen, my reflection barely visible in the glass. The unknown caller had been right. Someone had seen what I hadn't, someone had tried to warn me. But now what? What was I supposed to do with this knowledge? Go back inside and confront her? Demand an explanation? As if there was anything she could say that would erase what I'd just witnessed? No. There was nothing to say. The damage had already been done. The sound of the club door opening made me tense. I turned instinctively, half expecting to see her. But it wasn't Olivia. It was Ryan. His silhouette was outlined against the neon lights, his body language too relaxed, too self-assured. He ran a hand through his tousled hair, still slick with sweat from the performance, his gaze sweeping the alley before locking on to me. For a long moment, we just stood there, sizing each other up. The tension between us was thick, almost suffocating. "You got a problem, man?" His voice was calm, too calm. Like he knew exactly what had just happened in there, and he was daring me to do something about it. I felt my jaw tighten, my hands itching to throw a punch, to wipe that smug look off his face. But I forced myself to stay still, to breathe, to think. "Are you sleeping with her?" My voice came out low, almost dangerous. Ryan didn't even flinch. If anything, his smirk deepened. "That's between me and Olivia, isn't it?" That was all it took. The anger I'd been holding back snapped free like a beast unleashed from its cage. Before I knew what I was doing, my fist connected with his jaw, sending him stumbling back against the wall. He let out a grunt of pain, his smirk finally gone, replaced with something else, something darker. He wiped at his lip, checking for blood, then laughed. "You're a little late to the party, man," he said, pushing off the wall. "You think tonight was the first time? That's cute." My vision went red. I lunged at him again, but this time he was ready. He blocked my punch and shoved me back, hard enough that I staggered. My breath came fast and harsh, my body coiled like a spring, ready to strike again. But then I stopped. Because what was the point? What was I fighting for? A woman who had already chosen someone else? Ryan tilted his head, studying me like I was some kind of pathetic creature he almost felt sorry for. "You should walk away," he said, his tone softer now, almost pitying. "You don't want to know the rest." I clenched my fists so hard my knuckles ached. "Tell me." He sighed, rubbing his jaw. "She was never yours, man. Not really. She loved the idea of you. The stability. But this." He gestured vaguely toward the club, toward the life he and Olivia had built under the glow of neon lights and whispered secrets. "This is where she belongs." I felt something inside me break. Not just the trust. Not just the love. Something deeper. Something that couldn't be repaired. I stepped back, my chest rising and falling in uneven breaths. I could hear the music still thumping from inside, Olivia's voice somewhere in the distance, laughing, completely unaware of what was happening just outside. Ryan watched me carefully, waiting to see if I'd throw another punch. But I was done. Without another word, I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there in the alley, the city swallowing me whole. I don't remember how long I walked. The city blurred around me, neon lights bleeding into the rain-slicked pavement, car horns echoing in the distance like a heartbeat that didn't belong to me. My thoughts felt like static, just white noise, fragments of memories colliding and fracturing under the weight of what I had just seen, what I had just heard. "She was never yours, man." Not really. Ryan's words clung to me like a sickness, burrowing deep beneath my skin. I had spent years believing that Olivia and I had something real, something worth fighting for. But had I just been fooling myself? Had she ever truly been mine, or had she been slipping away long before I even noticed? I found myself standing at the edge of a bridge, the city stretching out before me in endless lights and movement. The wind was cold, cutting through my coat, but I barely felt it. My hands gripped the stone railing as I looked down at the river below, the water dark and restless, moving with a force that felt almost hypnotic. This was it. The moment of reckoning. I could go back to the apartment we once shared, pretend none of this had happened, pretend that I didn't just watch my wife press her body against another man on a stage in front of hundreds of people. I could let her come home, let her lie to me again, let her say whatever rehearsed excuse she had prepared. Or I could finally see things for what they were. I had been a fool. A blind, naive fool. And fools don't get second chances. I pushed away from the railing and pulled my phone from my pocket. My fingers hovered over Olivia's name in my contacts. Calling her would be pointless. What was I expecting? An apology? An explanation? There was nothing she could say that would take back what had happened. Instead, I did something else. I opened my messages, scrolled down to a name I hadn't spoken to in a long time, and typed 4 words. "I need to talk." Then, without waiting for a reply, I turned and walked away from the bridge. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in a quiet bar on the opposite side of the city, nursing a whiskey I barely tasted. The place was nothing like the Velvet Pulse. No flashing lights, no deafening music, just the low murmur of conversation and the occasional clink of ice in a glass. It was the kind of place where people came to disappear, to drown whatever ghosts they were running from. And tonight, I was just another ghost among them. I didn't have to wait long. A familiar figure slid into the seat across from me. Ethan Monroe. We hadn't spoken in years, Not since we had both walked away from the wreckage of a friendship that had once felt unbreakable. Ethan had been my best friend once, the guy who had been there through every high and low. And then, one day, he wasn't. Things had fallen apart between us, and neither of us had bothered to put them back together. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, I needed someone who would tell me the truth. He studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Didn't think I'd hear from you again," he said finally, signaling the bartender for a drink. "Yeah," I muttered, running a hand through my hair. "Guess I didn't think I'd need to do this either." Ethan didn't ask why I had called. He didn't need to. One look at me, and he already knew. "It's about Olivia, isn't it?" I exhaled slowly, nodding. He sighed, rubbing a hand over his jaw. "All right," he said. "How much do you actually want to know?" I looked up at him then, meeting his gaze dead on. "Everything." Ethan let out a low whistle, shaking his head. "All right," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Then let's start from the beginning." And with that, he began to talk. And the truth I had been trying so hard to avoid finally came crashing down around me. Ethan didn't sugarcoat it. The words left his mouth like punches, each one landing harder than the last. "You weren't crazy, man. She's been messing around with Ryan for a while. Months, at least." I sat there, my fingers gripping the glass in front of me so hard I thought it might shatter. "How do you know?" My voice came out quieter than I expected, like part of me already knew the answer but still needed to hear it. Ethan exhaled, swirling the drink in his hand before setting it down with a dull thud. "Because I've seen them," he said. "And not just at the Velvet Pulse. You ever wonder why I stopped coming around? Why I cut ties with both of you?" I stared at him, my mind scrambling to make sense of his words. I started, but he cut me off. "Because I couldn't stand watching it happen." His voice was hard, edged with something bitter. "I tried to tell you once. You remember that night? When we had drinks at your place and I told you something felt off about Olivia. You brushed me off. Said I was imagining things." The memory hit me like a slap. I did remember. It had been a late night, a quiet conversation over whiskey and worn-out friendships. Ethan had hesitated before saying it, his words careful but clear. "You ever feel like she's keeping something from you?" And I had laughed. Actually laughed. I told him he was being paranoid. That Olivia loved me. That she would never. My stomach twisted. Ethan leaned forward, his expression grim. "I figured if you didn't want to hear it then, you wouldn't believe it later either. So I walked away. But I kept hearing things. Seeing things. I still have friends in the scene, Dan. People talk." Forced myself to breathe, to keep my voice steady. "What things?" Ethan rubbed a hand over his face. "They don't even hide it, man. Not when you're not around. People have seen them together, leaving the club late, sneaking off during breaks, getting into his car and disappearing for hours." He shook his head. "And it's not just physical. It's not just a fling. She's with him. The way she looks at him, the way they are when they think no one's watching, it's real." I swallowed the lump in my throat, my chest tightening like a vice. "So what does that make me?" I muttered, barely able to keep my voice from breaking. Ethan sighed. "The guy she didn't want to let go of. The safe bet. The one who gave her a home to come back to while she played make-believe with Ryan." I let out a sharp breath, shaking my head as the weight of it all settled on me. How had I let this happen? How had I been so blind? "She loves the idea of you," Ethan said after a long pause. "Not you. Not the man sitting in front of me right now. But the version of you she built in her head, the one that made her feel stable, grounded. But Ryan, that's who she chooses when you're not looking." The words sliced through me like a blade, clean and final. I stared down at my drink, the amber liquid catching the dim light of the bar. My reflection wavered in the glass, distorted, unfamiliar. For so long, I had believed in something that wasn't real. Held onto a love that had already slipped through my fingers. And now, sitting here in this quiet, unremarkable bar with a man I hadn't spoken to in years, I finally understood what I had to do. I had spent enough time in the dark. It was time to burn it all down. The night air felt colder as I stepped out of the bar, the city stretching before me in a blur of neon lights and passing headlights. My mind was clear now, sharper than it had been in months, maybe even years. The weight in my chest was still there, pressing down on me like a lead anchor, but it wasn't confusion anymore. It was clarity. Ethan's words echoed in my head. She didn't love you, Dan. She loved the idea of you. I had wasted so much time believing in a version of Olivia that didn't exist. Believing in a future that had already crumbled beneath me while I was too blind, or too afraid, to see it. But I saw it now, and I was done pretending. I drove straight home, my hands gripping the wheel tighter than necessary, my heart pounding like a war drum. Every mile felt like a countdown, every red light another second for the anger inside me to grow. By the time I pulled into the parking garage of our apartment building, my jaw was clenched so tight it ached. She wasn't home yet. Of course, she wasn't. She was probably still basking in the aftermath of her performance, still wrapped up in whatever fantasy she had built with Ryan while I had been sitting in a bar, listening to the truth of my own humiliation. I stepped inside the apartment, flipping on the lights. Everything was exactly as I had left it. Neat, precise, controlled. The last remnants of a life that had once felt stable. A life that, in the span of a single night, had been exposed for the lie it was. I walked straight to the bedroom, yanked open the closet, and grabbed one of the suitcases from the top shelf. The zipper hummed as I pulled it open, and without hesitation, I started packing. Not her things. Mine. I had nothing to say to her. No screaming match, no last attempt at making her explain herself. She had already explained everything I needed to know, with her actions, with her lies, with the way she had chosen someone else while keeping me as her safety net. She didn't deserve my anger. She didn't deserve my time. I was giving her exactly what she wanted, freedom. And I was taking my own with me. By the time I heard the front door unlock, my bag was already packed, sitting by the bedroom door. I didn't pause, didn't hesitate. I walked straight into the living room, meeting her just as she stepped inside. She was still glowing from the night, her makeup flawless, her hair tousled just enough to look effortlessly beautiful. She smiled when she saw me, an automatic, instinctive smile that crumbled the second she saw the look on my face. Her eyes flickered to the suitcase. Dan. I didn't let her finish. I know, I said. My voice was calm, eerily so. I wasn't shouting, wasn't throwing accusations. I didn't need to. The truth was already out in the open. Her lips parted slightly, her eyes searching mine, but she didn't deny it. Didn't even try. Instead, she took a step forward. Let's talk about this. There's nothing to talk about. She flinched, just slightly, like she hadn't expected me to be this cold. Good. She had spent enough time believing she had control over this, over me. But I was done playing my part in her little game. Her eyes darted to the suitcase again. Where are you going? Anywhere that isn't here. Silence stretched between us. The weight of everything that had been left unsaid, the finality of this moment, pressed down on the room like a storm waiting to break. For the first time since I had met her, Olivia didn't have a response. No carefully crafted excuse, no sweet-talking manipulation. Just silence. I reached for my bag, slinging it over my shoulder as I walked past her, my heartbeat steady, my steps sure. I paused at the door, just for a second, just long enough to glance back. She was still standing there, still frozen in place, as if the reality of what was happening had only just caught up to her. And for the first time in a long time, I felt nothing. No pain. No regret. Just freedom. I turned away, stepped into the hallway, and closed the door behind me. Not looking back. Never looking back. Thank you for visited my YouTube channel. Your support, likes, and comments truly inspire me to create even more engaging content. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. You're a part of this amazing community, and I'm thrilled to share my stories with you. See you in the next video on YouTube.